Good morning. I'm Joey Gunnar. Welcome to From the Nosebleeds. Make sure you like, comment, share, and subscribe. Today we are joined by James Merrillat. James, how you feeling today on this Tuesday morning?
I'm doing well, man. I'm excited. I've never been on this show yet, so this is the first time, maiden voyage, being up here in the nosebleed. So couldn't be more excited. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, well, it should be a fun show. We're talking Broncos, and I know that you love this sort of conversation, talking about style points. I've heard you talk about it before. The Broncos have won a handful of games by a very small number. That seems like something that could come back to bite them in the butt, but right now they're winning. But moving forward, going into the playoffs, going into these last 5 games, is that something that they're going to have to work on? I think that it is something that they'll have to work on, and style points in this point of the season do tend to matter a little bit more. What do you think?
I don't know if I'd say style points matter. I just think it's a law of averages thing, right? Like we saw this last year with the Chiefs. They won every single game, it felt like, by the slimmest of margins. And if you're living right on the edge, if you're living in those margins every single week, eventually it catches up to you. And now this season, they're losing those games. So it's a little bit like having a hot streak at the blackjack table, right? Like, all right, this is great. You're winning, but how many times in a row you think you're gonna, get a 7 when you got a 4 showing and that sort of thing. So it's just living a little too close to the margin. That part of it makes me nervous, but I don't really care about style points. I mean, I think to some extent, people get caught up in that because look, this isn't college football. You don't go out and blow everybody out every week. It's why if you're in an eliminator pool, it's so difficult because every single week there's some head scratching game of like, oh my God, that team beat this team. It's nearly an impossible league to predict at times. A lot of the games are close. The Broncos have found a lot of different ways to win. They've won low scoring, boring games. They've won games against a good offense like Dallas where they had to go put up a bunch of points. They've come from way behind to beat the Giants. You name it. I have a hard time really coming up with a scenario in which, hey, this type of game yet. I think they've pretty much run the gamut here. So I tend to look at it as more of a positive than a negative. But living that close to the margin definitely makes me nervous. At some point it catches up to you.
Yeah, and nonetheless, they're going to the left side of the column. They're getting those wins, and that matters mostly. That's the overarching theme of what the Broncos have done this season is that they're winning games. But in their last 4 games, they've won by 3, 3, 3, and 1. And those games weren't all super tough. The Chiefs were tough. I get that. But a team like the Commanders, who have one of the worst run defenses in the league, you can't get your run game going a little bit more. You still running this committee with RJ Harvey, Tyler Beatty's getting snaps. We're seeing Adam Prentice out there as the fullback running it, and he's running it well. I'm not going to lie, but we're seeing inconsistency all across the board. That's one thing that I've said over and over and over this season. And at a certain point, something's going to fall. If you can't beat the Commanders by more than a score without their star quarterback, Jaden Daniels, then how are you expected to go out in the playoffs when you have the first round bye, but now you got to play a team like the Buffalo Bills? You're welcoming them to Empower Field. That scares me, honestly, because if you can't beat a bad team by more than one score, how are you expected to beat one of the best teams in the league? It's something that they need to work on. And yeah, I said style points matter going into these last 5 games, and they do in a certain aspect, but what really should happen is more real wins, not wins where you have to go to overtime, wins where you can win in all 4 quarters, outscore every opponent in all 4 quarters. That's something that we should be expecting from this Broncos team. Am I wrong?
I think to some extent, yeah. I think a 3-9 team in the NFL is different than a 3-9 team in college football, right? The Buffs are 3-9. They stink. They get blown out by anybody that's worth a hoot. I get it. The Commanders are having a down year. Jaden Daniels isn't playing, but it's not as though Marcus Mariota isn't a guy who's led teams to the playoffs before. It's not as though this isn't a team that, by and large, has most of the guys back who went 12-5 last year, made it all the way to the NFC title game. It's not a dumpster fire organization. It's not, at least in recent memory, since Dan Quinn's been there. He's a good head coach. So there's some pieces there. That's the part of it I think people get too caught up in. But I do think there's something we can agree on. So, and I wrote about this yesterday at denversports.com. I think there were a couple of fatal flaws exposed late in that game. And I think these are things that kind of get to what you're saying, right? The Broncos had the ball four times in the fourth quarter. Well, they had a lead. So a couple of them it was 20-14, a couple of them it was 20-17. Go down, get a score, go up by two possessions, and the football game is over. They had an interception, three punts, and on the punts, two of them were 3-and-outs. Like just the inability to execute there in the old 4-minute offense and put the game away, I think is part of what you're talking about, right? You go down and score and you go up 27-17, game's over, we all feel better about it. So that was troublesome. And then, quite frankly, the way the defense gave up the drive at the end of regulation that led to the tie, where if the Commanders had had 20 more seconds on the clock, they probably win the game. They were marching right down the field, 18 plays, got it down point blank range, and then just ran out of time, had to kick the field goal to send it to overtime. And then in overtime, I mean, talk about not being able to get a team off the field. And in both those drives, there were like 3rd and 25s. There were a couple of fourth downs, and they still allowed the Commanders to convert. They kind of made Marcus Mariota look like a much better quarterback than he is, and he's actually not a bad player, but he looked a little all-world in that fourth quarter and in overtime. Those two things worry me. And those are let's go to your point about the playoffs. You got a 3-point lead and you got 4 possessions in the fourth quarter. You got to go down and put the game away. The Broncos couldn't do it the other night, and I do think that's cause for concern.
Yeah, I mean, exactly right. And, the Commanders game is one thing that we point out because, of course, it just happened 2 days ago. But what about the Raiders? You beat them 10-7. Another really close game that should have been won much easier by this Broncos team that we have Super Bowl aspirations for. I know I do. I think that they can go out. This squad is good enough to go and compete for a Super Bowl. And right now, that's the end goal, of course. But the main goal right now on the plate, on the table, is the number 1 seed in the AFC. And that's not going to be possible or as possible if they keep winning these low scoring games, or not necessarily low scoring, but close games. Because you've got some really tough opponents coming up. You've got the Chargers, who is one of the only 2 teams that the Broncos have lost to this season. You have the Chiefs, and the Chiefs are the Chiefs. You're playing them in Arrowhead on Christmas Day. You have the Jaguars. You got Green Bay. Those teams are going to be tough. And I think that they can win out if they start beating these teams the way that they should. I like what you're saying. It's true that style points don't matter in NFL football as much as they do in college football. They don't. College football, you're playing for something in the future. You're getting these kids ready to go to the NFL. In the NFL, all that matters is winning games and contending for a Super Bowl. And right now, the Broncos are doing exactly that. However, I'm still nervous about this. And you know what it is? It's the fact that I'm from Minnesota, and I saw this exact same thing happen to the Vikings only a few years ago, where they won 13 games by 1 score and then immediately went to the playoffs and lost to Daniel Jones and the Giants. So that's something that I could really see being possible for this team, especially with the way that they are not closing out games the way they should be. And it seems honestly like a bit of a coaching thing where they just kind of back into these wins. You know what I mean?
Well, and look, there's kind of 2 camps, right? And I think to some extent, people in each camp can make a good argument. You can be in the camp of, hey, they're 10-2, and they're finding different ways to win, and it doesn't really matter how it looks. The fact that they can that they can get the wins at the end, they got the clutch gene, and you are what your record says you are, right? The old Bill Parcells adage. That's one camp. And then the other camp is this team's a fraud. Like, this is the worst 10-2 team in the history of the league, and blah, blah, blah. I think you can make an argument for both of those, but you mentioned the upcoming schedule. They got the Raiders this week. The Raiders aren't very good. They can't afford to stub their toe in that game, because after that, it's Green Bay, it's Jacksonville, it's Kansas City, it's the Chargers. Yeah, 3 of those 4 games are at home, but those are all teams that, right now are either in the playoffs or in the playoff hunt. If you make it through those games, I don't really care how you get the job done. I don't really care how you win. You beat 4 really good football teams. I don't expect that to happen. I don't expect them to go 5-0 and finish 15-2 on a 14-game winning streak. I think that's a lot to ask. But if you can go win 2 or 3 of those games and get yourself to where you're 13-4, I think at some point we need to stop complaining about Cindy Crawford's mole here, and just enjoy the fact that this team is finding a way to win. Will it make me nervous on wildcard weekend if they're not the 1 seed, or divisional round if they are the 1 seed? Of course, because I do think there's in the back of everybody's mind, how real is this? But ultimately, they'll get a chance to prove it to everybody on the field.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I'm floating in between both camps right now. Like yesterday, I was talking about, wow, Broncos win another low-scoring game. They bring it to OT, and Nick Bonito comes up with a huge play to win the game. And I was excited. I was really excited. I thought that was a great win. But now, after a day to decompress, I'm like, okay, the Broncos won another game by 1 score. It makes me nervous. And I just want to know from you, how important is it to you to have that number 1 seed? Like you just said, wild card weekend might be a little bit more nerve-wracking maybe than divisional round, which also will be nerve-wracking. But how important is that number 1 seed to you?
I think it's vital. I think for a couple of reasons. One, it's just the math of it, right? You have to win 2 games to go to the Super Bowl instead of 3. So it's 50% more wins you got to get to reach your goal. So that's the biggest part of it. And then you'll be playing both the games at home. And it's a team that hasn't lost a home game in a long, long time. In Power Field, will be rocking. I think with this defense, that's such a big factor because they can get after the quarterback. And if they can get a lead and all of a sudden the crowd's going crazy, like you can see that impact the game. So I think it's vital if you want to be in Santa Clara, in February at the Super Bowl. Do I think they can win Wild Card Weekend at home? Sure, playing a 5, 6, or a 7. Do I think they can go on the road and beat Indy? Yeah, I would have said 2 weeks ago. I think they can go on the road and beat New England. But man, you watch that team play. That is a well-rounded football team. Drake May is legit. They can run the ball. They play great defense, as we saw last night. They have really good special teams. I mean, Mike Vrabel and he had a good record in Tennessee, but they were always kind of that team. It's like, oh my God, can you imagine being a Titans fan? They are so boring. Now all of a sudden, now that he's got a legit quarterback, they're a different team and a different dynamic on offense. I don't know that they're going to go into New England and win, but that's the only other place they would have to go. And got a long way to go before you get to there. Because would it shock you, Joey, if the Broncos played wild card weekend, they beat, I don't know, say the Chargers come in here as the 6 seed, right? Or the 7 seed or wherever it lines up. And then the next weekend, Kansas City goes in and beats Drake May and company. So the AFC title game is back here. That wouldn't shock me at all. So I think it's important to get it just because of the math, but I don't think it's the only path to the Super Bowl.
That would scare me a lot, actually. If the first 2 games of the playoffs were against the Chargers at home and against the Chiefs at home, both teams know what it's like to play in Denver. I mean, no better team is more accustomed to playing in Denver than those 2 teams. That's my nightmare, actually. That would terrify me. I think that just doubles down on your point to be the number 1 seed.
Unless Pittsburgh gets in, I don't know that there's going to be a layup. Right, like it's going to be some good teams. That team to me doesn't scare. I mean, I don't know about you, but the Steelers, they just look like a mess, and they're quickly falling. But you're gonna have to. And I was just throwing out examples. If somebody could go in and beat, they could go in and beat New England, right? Because you're going to have maybe the Chiefs as a wild card, maybe the Bills as a wild card. Those are going to be very dangerous wild card teams, which is another reason, to your point, of why getting the 1 seed is so important. Because you avoid that. You avoid this weird year where 2, maybe 3 of the best teams in the conference are going to wind up wild cards, and then that's a really, really tough first round match. So just go get the 1 seed and not have to worry about it. Hey, now you're stressing me out, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm stressing myself out. These are the emotions I go through during the week from Broncos game to Broncos game. I'm thinking about, okay, what are they going to do for the next 5 weeks? What are they going to do for the next 5 games? Hopefully they can win some of these games in a way that sends a message to the league. That's what I'm focused on in a lot of ways. Is like, hey, a lot of people are looking at this team and saying, hey, you're not a real playoff team. You're not a real contending team. Worst 10-2 team I've seen. I mean, I'm hearing it everywhere I go. We're getting comments about it on yesterday's show saying it's the worst 10-2 team in history. And I don't agree with that at all. I just want the Broncos to go out there and prove it. So maybe it's something that they don't need to do. Maybe I'm being too greedy. I'm sitting here looking at a 10-2 team and saying, well, they could have won a few of these games by 10 points. And that could be exactly that. And right now we're in a really good position, especially to get that number 1 seed. Unfortunate that New England won last night, but they are going into a bye week this week. So the Broncos could have a very good opportunity to have that sole number 1 seed above New England next weekend after beating the Raiders, which would be awesome to see. But let's move on to a different football team in Colorado. And this one is much less fun to talk about, but thankfully we won't have to talk about them very much anymore. The Buff season is finally over. James, are you happy or a little bit sad to see this season go?
I'm certainly not sad. To be honest, I kind of stopped paying attention after probably the West Virginia game. I kind of wanted to see what Julian Lewis did when he got in there and playing on the road. They played okay in that game, no moral victories, but at least it wasn't a blowout. But once it turned into, every single week was 40 something to not much, and they're down 43 to nothing at half at Utah. I was just kind of done with it, man. With the Nuggets and the Avs and the Broncos and those teams doing well, it just didn't seem like it was really worth our while to tune into it. Plus, especially like this last game when if Juju's not going to play, there really is nothing to watch. So, I don't know. I'm happy it's over, but I'm certainly not sad. I am really curious to see what happens in the offseason, though. They
Yep.
have to make some changes on that coaching staff. uh, you know, People like to talk about how, oh, what do media members know? What do sports stock people know? We all told them Pat Shermer was a terrible hire. Like everybody knew that. Everybody in the world knew that was not going to work out well, and of course it hasn't. They need to make some improvements to that coaching staff and not just have it be, hey, if you've got a gold jacket, come to Boulder and you can coach. That doesn't mean you can coach just because you were a great NFL player. So they need to do that. Does Juju stay? I think he's staying, and that's why you didn't play him so he could keep the red shirt. I don't know why you would want to help out some other program. And then, hey, can you go out and recruit? And what do you do in the portal? And how do you restock this cupboard? So not sad the season's over. Looking forward to the off season, and hopefully they can get this thing fixed.
Yeah, a rough year for CU. Ended the season with a 5-game loss streak. Finished the season 3-9. Capped off the season with a 24-14 loss against Kansas State. Really didn't do anything of note. But now's time to bring up the question, and I will answer this prematurely with saying no. But I gotta ask: is Coach Prime on the hot seat? Is his seat starting to get a little warm? Is it time for people to start looking at him and saying, "Hey, how much time do you have left?"
I mean, he's on the hot seat from the standpoint of he's going to get criticism. He's on the hot seat from the standpoint of he's going to get mocked nationally. And you know what? He deserves it if this continues because he talks a great game, right? I'm bringing my Louis with me, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And you go out and you go 4-8 in your first year, 3-9 in your second year. Okay, people are going to make fun of that. So I think he's on the hot seat from a criticism standpoint and a mocking standpoint. I think financially, CU's not LSU. CU's not Alabama. They can't just buy out big contracts. So they really need it to work out. They really need next year to be a bounce back 8-4 type year. Maybe you're in the race for the Big 12 title game late in the season again, like you were last year. Like, okay, that would be a really good season. That would be a step in the right direction. And college football is so year to year now. It's one of the things I don't like about it because I like the build, right? Like, okay, you go 4-8, then you get that to 6-6, then you get that to 8, like to just the progress of it. Now it's every single season's a different team. I mean, last year people picked Oklahoma State to win the Big 12. They didn't win a game. And none of us know what any of these teams are going to be. So that's the part of it that I don't like, but it does give the Buffs a chance to turn it around quicker. He ain't getting fired though, Joey. Too expensive. They ain't running him out of there.
Yeah, well, no, they're not firing him now, but next season, another season similar to this, say he only gets 4 wins in the season, and they're looking at the buyout drop by $10 million, they might be having a conversation saying, hey, is it worth it? I mean, we're spending so much money on this guy, and the return is not as much as we had expected. I mean, I've heard Zach By talk about it on the air, but there's that one report that says CU isn't actually making really any money with Coach Prime. I mean, it's a whole big thing. So there's a likely possibility.
I don't buy that. Listen, I pay tuition up there, guarantee you. And I know it's not a direct correlation, but the enrollment, the number of people who are applying there, what the cost is done to go to school there, it's funny math. It's all how you want to look at it, right? But the other part of it is And this isn't always a good reason to make a decision in life, right? Like, you don't stay with the girl just because, well, who else am I going to date? But you do have to ask the question, if you're the Buffs, okay, if we fire Coach Prime and pay the buyout, where do we have the money to go get a guy who's going to be significantly better? Like, who are they going to hire? That's my question for the anti-prime guys, and I get why they're anti-prime. It was a dismal season, but what's the solution if you get rid of him? That's the part of the equation I don't know.
I doubt they've even thought about it so far because, again, he's not leaving this season. He's not going to leave. The team isn't going to fire him. We've got another year of Prime, and I expect it to do better. I really do have high hopes for this team. I feel like there are going to be some changes in this offseason, hopefully changes that rhyme with Spack Burmer. Hopefully that's a change that they can make, but there are things to look forward for this team, especially with Julian Lewis, going into his second season, getting a chance to play a full year as a sophomore. That's something that every Buff can look forward to. Is there anything you're seeing specifically that you can look forward to and be like, this is going to improve? Hopefully, the recruiting classroom or the transfer portal. What do you think?
I mean, that's the top of the list, is the fact that they have a quarterback. And he showed some signs, particularly in that West Virginia game, where it's like, okay, this kid can play. And you're not trying to piece it together with the transfer from Liberty who's got 1 year of eligibility left. Like, that just doesn't work. Go get a quarterback that you can build the program around. They have that guy. And I still am convinced that Coach Prime can get kids in the portal that, went to Arkansas, went to Bama, went to Florida State, and for whatever reason want to move and try to find success somewhere else. So, um, it'll be interesting to see, because we've had a lot of highlights the last few off seasons of, ooh, they got this 4-star high school recruit and this 5-star high school recruit. Let's see if some of those things happen, right? The Jujus, the Setons, those kind of guys. And then we don't really know much about these guys in the portal. Let's be honest. Like, the defensive lineman from Vandy. We're not gonna come on here and break that down. But I think it's interesting to see what schools those guys are coming from, because I've been a CU fan for a long time, and when it started going downhill after McCartney, after Neuheisel, then Barnett started okay, and it went downhill because back then there was no portal, but you would look at the recruiting class, right, and would always say other schools that were looking at them, and when the Buffs were good, they were getting guys that were looking at Michigan, Texas, USC. When the Buffs started to go downhill, they were getting guys who were looking at Tulsa and Idaho and those kind of schools. No disrespect to them, but that's not the cream of the crop high school recruits. Same thing here. You want to get guys who went to Bama, it turned into a numbers game, and they think they have a better chance of playing at CU. You don't want to get the leftovers from Bowling Green.
Yeah, no, you don't want to be targeting the Mountain West. You want to be looking at the SEC, the Big Ten.
Correct.
Definitely. Well, there's a lot to look forward to. Hopefully it all comes to fruition next season. We get a little bit of a break, a long, good break from the Buffs. Hopefully they can make some big changes again. But James, thank you so much for joining. That'll do it for today's episode. Make sure you guys like, comment, share, and subscribe. And we will see you all tomorrow. Until then, y'all have a great rest of your day. Bye, y'all.